Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Last time, we dove into some pretty fascinating ideas inspired by Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. He's got this intriguing take on consciousness and how we perceive time. Basically, he suggests our feeling of being separate individual could just be an illusion, a trick of time that hides the deeper connections we all share. Imagine that. At our core, we're all part of one big unified field of consciousness, just experiencing life from different time frame. Adding another layer to this mind bender, we have got Professor Bernard Carr throwing in some serious science with his mathematical models. He's out here blending cosmology and consciousness, hinting that the universe and our conscious experiences might be intertwined, all part of a singular universal consciousness that differentiated by how it dances with time. It's like physics meeting philosopher in a whole new way, challenging everything we thought we knew about ourselves, our separateness, and what it means to be you and me. Today, we are stepping into the new chapter called Self and versus Non-Self, where we're going to try this cosmology, metaphysics, philosophy, and Tibetan Buddhism to tackle one of the oldest questions out there. What makes you you, you? We have got an all-star lineup for these conversations. First up, Professor Bernard Carr is here to shake up our cosmic perspective, linking the vast universe to the subtle realm of consciousness. His work is a game changer, making us rethink our place in the star and every fabric of the reality. Then Dr. Bernardo Kastrup joining us again, the philosopher king of analytic idealism, championing the idea that reality is at its heart a mental construct. His thought on consciousness as the bedrock of existence are set to turn our view on reality and separations inside out. And we are incredibly honored to have Lelung Rinpoche with us, the 11 in his line, recognized by none other than the Dalai Lama himself, with his deep roots in Drepung Monastery and teaching from Dalai Lama. Rinpoche is here to offer a spiritual deep dive into Tibetan Buddhism's takes on the non-self and weaving his insight into our exploration with Dr. Kastrup and Professor Carr. So we are about to embark on a journey that might just change how we see ourselves and the world around us. So let's get started and pass the mic over to Professor Carr.
Thank you, Ivy. It's a delight to be here again. By the way, behind me, you can see a picture of the whole universe. And I'm a professional cosmologist, so I particularly like this picture. But even if you're not a cosmologist, I think one can appreciate it's very beautiful. Now, the reason I'm so excited by this meeting between the three of us is because it involves a discussion with inputs both from the domains of science and philosophy and from religion. Now, in my previous appearance here, I had a wonderful dialogue with Bernardo Kastrup, and that was really a dialogue between a physicist and a philosopher. And I have a very specific model of physics, and Bernardo has a very specific approach as an idealist from philosophy. But I've always felt that really there are three domains. There's the domain of matter, the domain of mind, and the domain of spirit. And in our previous discussions, really, Bernardo and myself were discussing the links between the domains of, if you like, matter and mind, science and philosophy. So why I'm so excited by this trialogue between the three of us is that now we're going to have the input from the religious side, and in particular from the Buddhist perspective. And that's why I just find this really exciting, and why I know this discussion is going to go, beyond what myself and Bernardo talked about before. And I have to confess that I have a particular interest in Buddhism. When I went up to Cambridge as an undergraduate, I immediately joined the Buddhist Society, and so I have a long history of interest in Buddhism, and especially Buddhist philosophy. I have to say I'm not a good Buddhist at all. I'm in the sense that I'm very interested in Buddhism, but I've done meditation, but I am not uh, advanced in any spiritual sense at all, and that's why I'm really in awe of Lelung Rinpoche. And what is intriguing to me is that myself and Bernardo have talked about these topics from a rather theoretical perspective, but what's interesting to me is that from a Buddhist philosophy perspective, all these issues are discussed at great length and in great depth. And indeed, Buddha himself would claim to have great insights into the questions we've talked about. So in some sense, it seems to me that Rinpoche probably knows the answers, at least the answers as presented in the Buddhist texts. So I'm really looking forward to the input from Rinpoche in this conversation. Well, I think I've spoken enough as a general introduction, and before we get, Ivy has mentioned the specific issues we want to talk about, all to do with self versus non-self, things like that. But I thought it would be interesting to have just a more general discussion, about the relationship between, if you like, science and philosophy and religion. And so I think I would like, Rinpoche, I know you got some slides to show. Would you like to show those slides now as your initial position?
Yes, sure. Thank you for inviting me here. And I'm so excited to be talking to you both. And you both are really knowledgeable. And I wouldn't be on your feet by comparing my knowledge in terms of especially external research. However, that what I have studied, I may talk a little bit. And to start with, let me lay out that what Buddhism talk about, and then how kind of started. First of all, that Buddhism is we have three layers, and first of all is the first thing is Buddhist science, and then we have Buddhist philosophy, and then we have a Buddhist religion. So general term religion, that some of our colleague scholars, Buddhist scholars, they think that it doesn't cover Buddhism by the religion name, because we have Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, and then followed by Buddhist religion. Anyway, that is the what in Buddhism. And then when we talk about Buddhist science, is the Buddha himself, when it discovered, he did not make something new, but he discovered scientist people discovering something. Likewise, Buddha have discovered all the nature of all the phenomena. So then the nature of phenomena is all interdependency, all interdependent. So from there, when it is interdependent, it tells it is not exist its own right. On the other side, it is also telling us in a conventional level, it is there, it is working. So that is the theory. So in this way, so we try to realize external phenomena and internal phenomena. And then obviously Buddha did not go out there to find out how many universes are out there and so on and so forth, because he did not think that is very important for the human society. The human society is, that what humans want is happiness, joy, and overcome from this suffering world. So therefore, Buddha, instead of going outside so much, he went inside, innate, to research on the innate mind. So looking the nature of innate mind. However, that innate mind, in internal world or external world, everything is interdependent. So then that is a huge subject, and that is what we're trying to explain. That is what we're trying to understand and realize. So without realizing that, we will not be able to explain exactly what we're doing. So that's what we do. In order to explain a little bit about on the interdependency, I have few slides to show how it is working. So for example, this slide, it's about 110 grains of rice. All the rice, when you look at, then I will be going through different slides, and then you see it's changing, missing the grains of rice, and comes up with a different color and different color. So this is you can these grains of rice and this shape, particular shape and number, all are dependently exist, rely on each other, interrelated. Without the number, without any of those single grains of rice, it will not make the 110 grains. So even single grains of rice will change the whole shape and the number. That is the power of the 1 grains of rice among those 110. So this it is telling us this is everything is interdependency. So this is you can go into innate mind, all the different parts of the mind, and also you can talk about entire world or entire planet. So all are dependent on each other. So, but as we are human beings, our understanding of the reality is lack. Therefore, we are not seeing this interdependency. So, as you know, nobody can claim this is wrong. Each of these grains has power to change the number, power to change the shape. And then you may, as you can see, I have these different colors of the rice. For example, among these, if you think these are a group of human beings, then there is red color. If that red color is the one with the compassionate, then you cannot say in this group of people there isn't a compassionate person, because one compassionate person is there, exists, and positive emotion is there. And then also, if you go another one, green one, when it's there, for example, if that is negative emotion, then when it is there, then you cannot say this person hasn't got negative emotion. It is there. One negative emotion, it makes the person has a negative emotion. You cannot say it doesn't have the negative emotion.
Well, thank you so much, Rinpoche. And I must confess, when I was looking at your picture of the 110 grains of rice, it sort of reminded me of the picture behind myself. Except, of course, they're not grains of rice, they're stars and galaxies and things like that. But I suppose the same point, in some sense, does apply.
Yeah.
And I was just very struck when you started off talking about the fact that Buddhism has both a scientific, a philosophical, and a religious aspect, that it deals both with outer and inner experience, because that I think that's rather different, for example, from Christianity, where you don't have that same balance. In Christianity, you often seem to think there's a sort of tension between science and religion, whereas in Buddhism, they seem to be combined. And I was particularly interested because what's always fascinated me about Buddha's own revelations is that I know Buddha claimed that you could get knowledge of the universe both from an intellectual process, which is, I suppose, the scientific side, and from the Dharma, the teaching, but also, to me, particularly intriguing, from what you might call a clairvoyant knowledge of what the universe was like. And Bernardo knows I'm interested in clairvoyance because that's a top part of psychical research. And I was always fascinated reading some of the Buddhist texts, especially the suttas, which came from Buddha himself, that he claims to have insights into the physical universe, not just into the inner psyche, but into the outer world as well. And so if you interpret his sayings in a certain way, he seems to be talking about things which today we would call stars and galaxies and even the whole cosmos. And I understand that he would even have insights into the nature of the cosmos through his information he got through meditation. So, for example, he would have a vision of the whole history of the universe, the great kalpas, cycles of the universe, not just cycles of individual lives, but cycles of the whole universe. And what always fascinated me was that when you read these texts, you can sort of work out what is the lifetime of the universe. And it turns out to be, something like 20 million years, 20 billion years. And that's, roughly speaking, what modern cosmology says. And yet Buddha was giving this information, whatever it was, 500 BC. Now, of course, most of my cosmology colleagues would say that's ridiculous. How could somebody meditating get insights into the age of the universe, whereas it's taken cosmologists 100 years and billions of dollars to find out this information from the Space Telescope and the James Webb Telescope? And so most of my cosmologists won't accept this. But most of my cosmology colleagues won't accept it. And yet it's clear that Buddha was obviously an enlightened being. And I see no reason why he shouldn't actually, as an enlightened being, have insights into the physical universe. And I've always, so in some sense, it means there's a sort of inner space station. And I just wanted to ask you, how you regard that. I mean, would you share my enthusiasm for this, or am I being too simplistic? In other words, do you accept, is it reasonable to say Buddha could have had this insight into the nature of the physical universe, even the cosmology, on the basis of his meditative experiences?
Yes, as we claim that Buddha have achieved enlightenment, and that means he have achieved the omniscient mind. It means that a mind that can know everything existence. So that means that no matter how far, no matter how deep, he will be looking at like, on the palm of his hand. He can describe if it's necessary, if it's helpful for the people that who are suffering.
I think the point you were making was that actually Buddha, although he did have these insights into the nature of the physical universe, didn't tend to emphasize them too much because he was more interested in people's, the social aspects of what is useful. And I think he said that really these questions about how long the universe will exist aren't really very helpful. They don't help you attain enlightenment. They don't help you solve the problems of the world. So, but do you think he would have changed his mind today? Because obviously today we have much more emphasis on knowledge for its own sake, even if it isn't practical. Do you think he would still say that today?
Alive at the time that that the surrounded him, all the philosophers that they already have a view of the world and the atmosphere, everything, that they have a system how the world exists. So if Buddha trying to establish, like scientists now, that how debate and show the proof and it's wrong or whatever, that will take a huge number of time, a huge time, and then the life expectancy is not that long, and then what he need to do in his life, and it doesn't allow to do that. And also then it's better to build up his insight and tell his insight based on that, then tell the world what he know, and without debating the different planets and so on and so forth. So the main thing is he want to bring happiness in people's mind, not to go out and measure the different planets, and that doesn't really directly helps our mentality.
I understand that, and I would have to confess.
And also the second thing is, as you were saying, if Buddha was here, would he change his mind? It might be, because nowadays that world is in a way is smaller because of the technology, and he may be very happy to explain how he sees and how the different planets created, and all these 5 elements, how this worked, and so on and so forth. He might be like yourself will explain thoroughly, and will make many people believe what he says.
I understand that, and I would have to confess.
And also the second thing is, as you were saying, if Buddha was here, would he change his mind? It might be, because nowadays that world is in a way is smaller because of the technology, and he may be very happy to explain how he sees and how the different planets created, and all these 5 elements, how this worked, and so on and so forth. He might be like yourself will explain thoroughly, and will make many people believe what he says.
That's very interesting and rather encouraging too. And I have to say that for all the advances of cosmology, I don't think we can claim that it makes people happier. I don't think it helps people become more enlightened, and it certainly doesn't solve all the problems, the many manifold problems on the surface of the earth. So nevertheless, I've always felt that I still want to study cosmology despite that. But so I quite understand where Buddha was coming from, but I was particularly encouraged by your remark that he might have slightly changed his view if he was speaking to us today. Now, Bernardo, I must apologize because I've been talking far too much, And I would now ask you to make your comments as a philosopher. I don't know how you react to this idea that one can get religious insights into the nature of the physical universe, or indeed whether one can get religious insights into various philosophical truths. But would you like to react in some way to what Rinpoche has been saying?
Sure. There is no doubt in my mind that the royal avenue to knowledge is introspection. If you want to understand the mind, and if you have concluded for whatever reasons in your life that what is out there is more mind and not something other than mind, then the way to get the deepest insights into the mind is to go into the mind, is to turn inwards. And yet that's not what I do. Why is that? Well, one, I don't have the skills. I have a mind that is very hard to dislodge from its normal analytical state of consciousness. So I was not born with the skill set to do that. That's one, and maybe the most honest reason. And there are a couple of other reasons. One is I am a Westerner, and the rules of the game in the West, for whatever reasons, probably bad reasons, but it is what it is, we privilege a form of objective knowledge because we don't trust the mind. We think that subjectivity is untrustworthy. And sure enough, mind has a tendency to deceive itself. But of course, the challenge of proper introspection is to go through those layers of self-deception and come to more solid ground afterwards. But if you have never landed on soft ground during introspection, you will not trust the mind, and your whole culture will sort of evolve around the idea that introspection is not reliable, that people deceive themselves. So we need to find objective avenues to knowledge, like logical reasoning and empirical evidence. And sure enough, I do that as a kind of an acknowledgement of what my cultural roots are, and a surrender to the rules of the game as the game is played in the West today. And of course, the West has sort of contaminated the entire world with its worldview. So when I say West, I don't mean only the geographical West, but how we sort of loaded cultures across the world with our way of being and regarding reality. There is, of course, at the end of all this, there is benefit for these three avenues of knowledge to be pursued separately and then to converge and reinforce one another. Because if you, through introspection, arrive at the same insights that you arrive at from contemplating empirical evidence, and the same insights you arrive at by pondering things logically through reasoning, then you are in a solid place, because all three different avenues to knowledge have brought us to the same place. And in a sense, this trialogue more or less represents that. Bernard, you are the empirical guy. I am sort of the reasoning guy. And Lelung Rinpoche is pursuing the royal path, with the path of spiritual introspection. From very early on in my life, I'll tell you a story instead of making any specific metaphysical point. I'll tell you a story so people can make of it whatever they want. I remember being a preschooler, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And every time I would chance upon a statue of the Buddha, a laughing Buddha with his big belly exposed, I would want it. And I didn't know why, I just would want it. And then my parents later on told me that this was happening since I was a toddler. That even before I could speak, if they were carrying me around in a shop and I chanced and I could see a statue of the Buddha, I would point at it and say, I want that. So I'm not trying to make any metaphysical point, but to highlight that my sympathy for Buddhism specifically, but also more generally to the introspective avenues to knowledge comes from very, very early on for me. And it would sort of take a backseat. This metaphysical interest would take a backseat during my studies. I went to university at 17 and, became completely focused on reasoning and evidence because that's Western education, especially in academia. And it was only my mid-20s when the metaphysical questions returned to me, because by that time I had already been at CERN, 96, 97, I was there, the home of the big accelerator in Switzerland, arguably the cathedral of reasoning and empiricism in the world today. And I was working on a data acquisition system of the Atlas detector, part of, the colorimeter, part of the Atlas, which is part of the Large Hadron Collider, the big accelerator that discovered the Higgs boson. And we had to, look at the data being produced by the experiment, and on the spot, in real time, decide what data was just old physics, like jets, and what data could represent the decay of a Higgs boson, because that you don't want to throw away. You want to record that data. It can give you the Nobel Prize. And we had to make a decision like this every 25 nanoseconds, very fast. So we had to build computers that could do that. That was my job. And we built a system based on physical insight. We understand the physics, so we are going to make this decision based on our understanding of physics, which is the system that is in place right now. But we also looked at getting artificial neural networks, AI, to look at the same data and check, can it make as good a decision or better in the same 25 nanoseconds? And the neural network was just as good as a physicist. And that stayed in my mind. We didn't choose the neural network because at the time, we didn't have the visualization tools we have today. So we knew the neural network was as good as the classical algorithm, but we didn't know why and how. We didn't know what it was doing. It was a black box, and that, physicists don't like that. So the classical algorithm went online, not the neural network, but the thought stayed in my mind. We can build an artificial neural network that is as intelligent as a physicist in discerning, whether there is new physics here. What does it take to make it conscious? That was the question that popped in my mind. And for a couple of years, I struggled with it. And I realized that whatever I would change in that computer, whatever function and structure I would change, it would give me no less and no more reason to think that it's conscious in and of itself, the way I am conscious. In other words, obviously, I had taken a wrong turn. I was in an alley that had no exit. That something in my line of thinking, some step I made was wrong, and I had to retrace my steps. And it was then that I concluded that consciousness is not the product of particular physical arrangements. That's not how it works. If you think that that's how it works, you can pursue that line of thinking until you hit a wall, an impassable wall. That's the hard problem of consciousness, as it's known in philosophy today. And to me, that was terrible because my whole worldview was now gone, and I was sort of stepping on eggshells. So I had to work out, a new worldview for myself, taking consciousness as primary. And interestingly, it arrived at some of the conclusions, well, maybe the key conclusions of Buddhism. There is this Buddhism, it's not an anecdote, it's a saying in which somebody sees a flag fluttering in the wind, and then one says, the flag is moving, and the other says, the air is moving, and the third one says, mind is moving. And of course, the third answer is the correct one. And that's exactly the conclusion I arrived at. I think what is out there is a world that is indeed beyond our individual minds, but it is too a mental world, a world composed of mental states, not my mental states, not your mental states out there. And what we call perception is a cognitive representation of the dynamics of those mental states out there. In other words, the flag moving is a cognitive representation of mental processes. The flag moving is mind in movement, quite literally, not metaphorically at all. And that gave me a certain warmth of heart, a sort of a reassurance that although I pursued much more tortuous and complicated line to arrive at that conclusion through empirical evidence and reasoning, I was arriving at conclusions that people who pursued the royal path to knowledge, introspection, at a very special time in human history, people much, much more capable than I am, arrived at the same conclusion, and that gave me a lot of reassurance.
Bernardo, can I just ask you, because you've referred to these three avenues, which I understand correspond, if you like, to the path of science and philosophy of religion. When you use the phrase the royal path, are you referring to that? You're referring to the religious or the philosophical? I'm not quite sure what you're calling royal.
The introspection. So religion, spirituality, meditation, everything that looks inwards. Of course, religion in the West, especially Christianity in the West, lost a bit of that inward movement because we are supposed to delegate that to the clergy. The clergy are the intermediary to gods, so we don't need to introspect. They do it for us, and they tell us the answers.
But you're not counting philosophers as introspectionists. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
No, philosophers, especially analytic philosophers these days, they are the antithesis of introspection. You would be amazed how few philosophers of mind know what mind is. It is scandalous. There are a lot of people out there who are practicing analytic philosophers of mind, receiving their salaries from taxes that people pay, and they do not know what mind is. They do not have the first clue what mind is. And yet they are philosophers of mind. Now, analytic philosophy is not based on introspection. It prides itself in being objective. In other words, not knowing what the mind is and still writing about it.
That's fascinating because, one often has this image of the philosopher who's sitting there on a stone with his eyes closed, thinking, and as though it's an introspective process. But you've made this very important point that actually modern cosmology is precisely not that.
Yeah, you could say that reasoning is a form of introspection, but I don't think that reflects really what's going on. When you reason, you're operating with your mind, but you are not turning the focus of your mind back to itself. You're operating on the basis of certain axioms, in other words, logic. And you're playing a mental game, a conceptual game that is always here. It doesn't really go inwards into the depth of mind. It doesn't explore the mechanisms through which mind operates.
I understand.
You sort of take the rules of the game for granted, Aristotelian logic, that those are the rules for derivation, and then you play a conceptual game. I don't call reasoning an introspective activity. I think it would be a dishonor to introspection to say that reasoning is a form of introspection. Well, maybe a superficial one. Buddhism uses reasoning too.
Well, thank you for that clarification. That's very important. And thank you also, Bernardo, for introducing the word consciousness, because that's obviously going to play a key role in the conversation that follows. And I would only make one point is that I sometimes think, well, you've got the world of matter is science, and then consciousness is associated with the world of mind. And I've always taken the view, and I'm not sure if you will agree with this, I've taken the view that that's wrong. You can't think of the material world as being unconscious and the mental world as being conscious. Consciousness, in my perspective, is so fundamental that it underlies all three worlds. It underlies our material experience of the material world, it underlies our experience of the mental world, and it underlies our experience of the spiritual world. So, and I think you will agree with that because I know what you've written on the subject. But actually, I wanted to bring Rinpoche back into the conversation. Rinpoche, would it be fair to say that Buddhism does essentially, which has got a very sophisticated philosophy of mind, would it be fair to say that Buddhism does essentially take the idealist view, which Bernardo is advocating? It takes the view that basically mind is primary. Would it be fair to say that is also the Buddhist outlook?
Yes. The Buddhism, we talk about the mind or the consciousness, that is the key in us, that when we try to find self, then obviously there's 5 aggregates, but when we talk about rebirth and reincarnation, rebirth and traveling to another world, that the consciousness only be able to travel, not our body, physical body. So therefore, the consciousness is the key player in our philosophy or our religion or our inner science. And then, as Bernardo says, that he goes with logic and reasoning, and the logic, that verifiable logic, that is very important. So that in Buddhism, as I was saying, it starts with science, and that's why I am trying to show that interdependency on map, like, so that everything got to be logically right or correct. Otherwise, we cannot just go by words. Saying, for example, Buddha himself told us that you don't go by my words. You have to do a research yourself to learn. When you see it, then just follow. Don't follow me because I am so called Buddha. So that is a very, very important his message. That because of that, as a Buddhist, we have so much freedom to do a discover, or to debate, and even we can say there's no Buddha while we're doing the debate. You can say so much. Basically, what we need to do is we need to find a nature of self, and then find that nature of the consciousness, and then find that the nature of the consciousness is a positive, negative, and whether this is be able to change in a further and develop further and further, and one day it become enlightened. So that's the thing. So therefore, I can agree that go by reasoning is very, very important.
So Bernardo, I don't know whether I have the impression that idealism is still the minority view among philosophers, although it seems to be gaining prominence to a large extent due to your own contribution. But at least it must be gratifying to know that you have got millions of people from the Buddhist perspective who are backing your view.
It's very reassuring.
Can I ask you both actually another question? I mean, the whole point of idealism is that mind is viewed as being primary. In other words, primary, prior to matter. But can I just ask, when we talk about spirit, does one regard spirit as being coming before mind? In other words, because idealism is normally a discussion about the role of mind. But so if you're bringing spirit into the conversation, do you feel that spirit is prior to matter, just as matter is prior to spirit is prior to mind, just as mind is prior to matter? Or do you think mind and spirit somehow are all just entangled together? So I could ask both of you that. From your perspective, Bernardo, do you make a distinction? Are there idealists who would say, well, actually, spirit is even more fundamental than mind?
In the West, the words spirit and mind have the common root in the Greek psyche.
Yes.
So spirit, mind, and soul, historically in the West, since the Renaissance, are synonyms, and I abide by that convention. So when I say mind, I may as well say spirit or soul. It's psyche. That's what I mean. But in the West, we are very poor, because we are so poor at true introspection. We haven't developed a sufficient vocabulary to capture the nuances of mental space. We don't have different words for different mental properties, different mental configurations, different mental contents. We don't have that. It's all mind, soul, spirit. It's all one thing. I think in the East, they have a lot more sophistication. They have many different words for different states of consciousness through which they can be much more precise about what they mean. For us here, we don't even take mind as primary yet. So there is no point in trying to be more precise because we are fighting a very early game still. Know what I mean? I think there is room for many words. Let me talk about the content now, not just the semantics. I don't think the properties of the human mind are primary. I think what we call the human mind entails higher level mental functions, such as metacognition, that were not there when life arose on Earth. The fact that we developed these new mental topologies that enable metacognition and self-awareness, this is a reflection of evolution, our need to survive in our environment. So these high-level properties are not there from the beginning. What is there from the beginning, and that's what I refer to when I say mind, is subjectivity. It is the I behind the experience. It's the experiencer. It is the field of subjectivity within which certain patterns of excitation are the experiences of the subject. So, and that I think is primary. I think all of nature is one spatially and temporally unbound field of subjectivity. And living beings are dissociated segments of that field of subjectivity. We know dissociation can happen to mind. That's an empirical fact, well established in the 21st century. And so the particular living beings, the particular individual minds, in my view, are dissociated mental complexes within that one field of subjectivity. And of course, no process in nature is perfect. Combustion doesn't burn everything there is to burn. The sun doesn't dry all humidity on the ground after it stops raining. So dissociation is not perfect either, meaning that I believe it's very plausible that through introspection, masters in meditation can access states of this field of subjectivity that is ordinarily impossible for the rest of us to access, that being the source of their knowledge. So yeah, I think mind as this one field of subjectivity to which everything can be reduced, that is what I think is primary. But I don't think human self-reflection, human cognition, the whole phantasmagoria of human experience, I don't think that is primary and that it's everywhere.
Thank you for that, Bernardo. And I'm so glad you made the distinction between individual mind, human mind with a little m, and what I always call collective mind with a big M. And when people say, "Are you an idealist?" I always say, "Well, I'm an idealist with a capital I, in the sense that I believe everything is in universal mind, but I'm not idealist with a little I, in the sense that I think everything is my mind." And I was also interested how I think what you were saying is that there's no distinct barrier between mind and spirit because it's a whole continuum, really. And I think I would say the same thing, that there's no real distinction between matter and mind, because when you analyze it more deeply, you find that your view of matter, as presented by modern physics, is really very mind-like. So yeah. I would say that the division both between matter and mind and between mind and spirit they're both equally nebulous.
Yeah, I think ultimately everything can be reduced to one field of subjectivity. In other words, everything can be explained in terms of one field of subjectivity. And this idealism with big I, which I share with you, is not the subjective idealism of Bishop Berkeley, who maintained that to be is to be perceived. meaning the world as we see it is sort of our own mental construct. And when Berkeley was confronted with this by his critics, and he was asked, well, but if we are not perceiving the world, then there is no world? And then he said, no, there is, because God is always perceiving the world. But it ties up reality with our perception, which I think is a bit anthropocentric. So idealism to me does not mean that the world is in my individual mind. There is a world out there beyond my individual mind, but that world too is mental, just like your thoughts are mental, but they are outside my individual mind.
So, Rinpoche, maybe I can bring you back now into the conversation, because you can see myself and Bernardo are rather of one mind. But can I just ask whether, from a Buddhist perspective, you would agree with this? In other words, does Buddhism make a distinction between mind and spirit? Or do you just feel that, like Bernardo was saying, they're really just they're all connected in one broader picture?
Well, as Bernardo was explaining, that to introduce or to talk about mind or consciousness, when I'm saying the consciousness and mind, that may not be covering what I'm exactly saying in my mind. So there is a lack of terms, vocabularies to explain. So one, to explain exactly how or what the Buddhist people explaining, that you may need to go through this study, so then you know exactly how we're talking about, and then you may find many words to link up and to explain what we're talking. Anyhow, that the mind, then in this way, that when you talk about mind and the spirit, then we don't talk much of spirit. And then in the West, I've been here for some time, and then people say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual person. So in this term, I kind of hearing that that rather explaining the mind, then they're talking about what they believe, feeling. So that is more like a spiritual thing. And so
I suppose it's I'm sometimes interested in psychical research and in those phenomena like telepathy and clairvoyance and indeed a variety of experiences which are rather controversial from a scientific perspective, which I personally find most interesting. And so another way of posing the question is there a distinction between psychic phenomena and, if you like, mystical phenomena? Or are they just, are they all on a spectrum? Because I mention that because I know within the religion traditions, I think maybe even within the Buddhist tradition, one is often discouraged from thinking too much about psychic phenomena, because psychic phenomena, the siddhis or whatever, are regarded as a distraction from enlightenment, if you like. They're flowers by the wayside, which are a distraction on the spiritual path. So I've always imagined that within Buddhism, they make a distinction between psychic phenomena, which are in some sense something you don't want to seek, even if they happen, and spiritual phenomena or mystical phenomena, which are worth following, because that's the intention is to become enlightened. So rather than talking about the distinction between mind and spirit, could I ask about the distinction between psychic and mystical experiences within Buddhism? Would you say that's a valid distinction from a Buddhist perspective?
psychic and what?
Is it in other words, is a psychic phenomena which is of interest to science, because the people who study psychic phenomena are scientists. They're trying to say it's part of science. But psychic phenomena, the scientists tend to reject it because it's too mystical, and the mystics tend to reject psychic phenomena because it's too scientific. And I'm just interested, from your perspective as a Buddhist, whether you think the interest in psychic phenomena is a distraction from the spiritual path, which will be avoided.
Well, it's depends on where you stand and where you look at. And for example, all the external gadgets and everything is a distraction for the to find in internal peace. However, this is also you can bring in to help you to learn more, understand more, and also you can utilize as to help others to gain more happiness. So that I think it doesn't really not like a black and white.
Yeah. It reminds me, when I was at Cambridge, I was interested in Buddhism and psychical research, and I wanted to do a telepathy with my meditation group. There was a group of about 20 of us. We were doing wasn't Tibetan meditation, it was samatha meditation. And I wanted to do an experiment to see whether people after meditation had a telepathic connection. And they said, oh no, your teacher, the teacher will not allow you to do that, because they don't want to mix psychical research with meditation. But actually, I asked him, the teacher, he was called Nai Booman, and he gave me permission. So I did this experiment in telepathy with people after they'd done their meditation session. And, well, I won't go into the results, but I found it, there did seem to be some indication that there was a link. But the point is, the point I was making, I was allowed to do the experiment to actually to test this. But I just find the whole Bernardo knows I'm a bit obsessed with psychical research, but it's an uncomfortable position because most physicists don't believe in the phenomena, most philosophers don't believe in the phenomena, and many spiritual people believe in the phenomena but don't really think we should don't like to get involved in them. So I don't know, Bernardo, if you want to comment on this, because I know you also have views about the role of psychic phenomena in these discussions.
If you ask me, do you believe psi phenomena happen? I would say, well, I don't have the luxury to choose not to believe, because I've seen it happening around me. They don't happen to me. It has to do with how I am put together, I think. But I have seen instances of it happening around me that are just absolutely undeniable. But you don't hear me talk about it because of the following. I think there is a trap here. Whether deliberate or not, I don't know. But the trap is the following. It's the notion that you can only prove that physicalism/materialism is wrong if there are psi phenomena. And if there aren't psi phenomena, then materialism is sufficient to account for everything. That is the trap, because it's absolutely untrue what I just said. Materialism does not account for anything, because anything is an experience. Even a scientist looking at the images made by an electron microscope, that image needs to be perceived, and perception is an experience. Or even a scientist, like I used to be at CERN, looking at a computer screen, seeing an energy distribution histogram and seeing a little bump in it and saying, oh, here's the Higgs boson. It's a nice explanation, and then, oh, there's a little bump. That's the Higgs boson. Well, that is a mental thing as well. I need to perceive that histogram on the screen of my computer. And materialism does not explain any one experience. It does not provide an account of why the redness of an apple feels red, why a strawberry feels sweet, and what is it that is sweet in the brain. That there is no account for that. So that's why I avoid the subject of psi, because I don't want to implicitly fall into that trap or convey the impression that I too think that we need psi in order to disprove materialism. I think we can disprove materialism based on very ordinary, scientifically established data, such as quantum entanglement disproving non-contextuality, such as the neuroscience of consciousness disproving this nice clean correlation between the richness and intensity of experience and brain activity. There are many instances in which that correlation is not there. So we don't need psi. And that's why I never talk about psi, because I don't want to grant that trap to the opposition, if you know what I mean. But I have seen compelling psi phenomena happening to people very close to me, including my partner. And because I was there while it was happening, I don't have the luxury to be able to dismiss it or discount it as somebody else's made-up story.
I understand that, Bernardo, and that you don't need psi as an argument for, well, the idealistic worldview. But what I would say is that psi does provide evidence for it, and I would say that, in fact, psi provides evidence that consciousness is not generated by the brain, but it's filtered through the brain. And so I agree you don't need psi to come to that conclusion, but I would argue that it is nevertheless a powerful weapon, if you like, in the armory of arguments for the idealistic perspective. This is getting into the more specific topic. Obviously, we've introduced the concept of consciousness, but now we want to get into the actual question of what is the nature of consciousness. And to me, the key question, which literally has just arisen in the last minute, is does consciousness, is it generated by the brain, as 99% of neuroscientists would assume, and probably 90% of physicists would assume, or is consciousness merely channeled through the brain, in which case the brain is in some sense a filter of consciousness? And as Bernardo knows, I very much favor the filter view. And I would argue that one of the reasons I brought up psychic phenomena, because it seems to me psychic phenomena provide evidence that consciousness is filtered through the brain rather than being produced by the brain. But then, if that's the case, we have to bring the evidence from Buddhist philosophy to bear. I mean, obviously, one of the implications of consciousness being filtered through the brain is that in some sense it means when the brain dies, consciousness doesn't disappear. In other words, it's implying, because if your consciousness is just temporally associated with the brain during life, it would imply that consciousness could exist after death, or that consciousness could have existed before birth. And obviously that's a central tenet, I guess, of Buddhism, that you can have reincarnation, and that in some sense after you die you can survive death and be reborn. And this is obviously why your insights, Rinpoche, are going to be so important here, from reincarnation and survival. And obviously in Buddhism one does believe in reincarnation and one does believe in survival, but there is obviously some ambiguity as to exactly what is the nature of the self which is surviving. And I know this is quite a complicated issue, and especially when one also bears in mind that within philosophy you have this concept that there is the concept of anatta, which says that there is no self. So could I ask you to say something about in what sense, if there is reincarnation and if there is survival of consciousness after death, what does that tell us about the nature of self? Is it, in what sense, when I die, what element of Bernard Carr is going to survive and be reborn? When people talk about children who have memories of previous lives, which is something Ian Stevenson looked at, that says that something of the previous personality has persisted into another body. But precisely what does that mean about the nature of self? So I'm asking you now if you could respond to that, but I've not probably phrased the question in a very coherent way. But how do I link the concept of self and the concept of anatta, the no self, with reincarnation?
So am I talking on that?
Yes.
Okay. This topic is a very, very tough topic. Until you ourselves experience, we don't know. When one of us experiences, when you tell others, they won't believe. This is the phenomenon that we are going to talk. So as you already mentioned, that the consciousness, when I like your idea or what you explain, that brain is the like a receiver. And receives the consciousness, and then it activates consciousness, activates the brain, and then whatever you want it in your mind, then that makes the movement. That's the idea. It suits Buddhist philosophy or Buddhism. And also, I would like to make a point, and that currently scientists that talk about the brain is the one who is, doing everything. However, in early days, talking about the heart is the one who is doing the activities. So in more you do a research, you may find another way of explanation, how our body works. So, however, whatever happens, that beyond that, there is a consciousness. And that consciousness, of course, it is a momentary, but it has a continuation. And that continues, and to the next after death of the brain, still continuously, traveling. So that we believe that because of that, as you earlier mentioned, some children, they remember earlier their life parents, and then naming them, and they're also parents, and the town, and that the location of a house and everything. So that also we cannot deny by the scientists. You cannot just deny, saying, okay, it is impossible. You have to pay attention what's happening. So also on another level, that if we talk, we in the Tibetan word, we say that Tukdam means meditative state after the brain is gone or our body function is died. Then we have this meditative state. It is also, not everybody go through in that state. However, there are number of practitioners or general people. Sometimes it happens that meditative state, and that moment, our brain and body functions is all died. There's no functioning. However, because of the person, the practitioner is in a meditative state, it can stay like 20 days or 30 days or, few days, that, they can keep up the body as if they are alive, and that the body, at least the body does not smell. So that for many days, and then it is happening. And then since His Holiness the Dalai Lama have this conference with scientists and Buddhist philosophers together, and many times that they are doing, and then afterwards they are providing some scientists to go and check what is happening after the death, putting all these different gadgets and doing a research. So they can see the body is, in general, that you and we know that body, if after the death, maybe in 2-3 days, that it smells. There's no way that you can keep without fridge to have the body, and until you have a cremation or whatever. So this is a kind of a proof that there is consciousness beyond the brain. So I also, myself, I don't need to follow, Buddhism. I was not, ordered to follow Buddhism, and I have my own right to follow whatever I would like to, and whatever I feel the right. However, learning all the reasoning, and then going into the mind, searching the consciousness, and searching the positive emotion, negative emotion, and then how to tackle with those, and it helps. It certainly helps to calm down, become a calmer person, or become a more compassionate person. And there are lots of things that you can improve in our mind, and then become a nicer person. Definitely. If there is a nicer and a worse person, then you can turn into a nicer person.
Thank you. What I find fascinating, Rinpoche, is that in the West, we have all these debates about whether consciousness can survive death, and whether you've got evidence from near-death experiences or communications from mediums as to whether or not consciousness survives death. And we always say, well, you just have to wait and see. And yet what fascinates me is that within the Buddhist tradition, you have a very rich philosophy of what does happen after death. And I remember, of course, the book, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, by Sogyo Rinpoche, who, in fact, I knew him at Cambridge. We were students at the same time. But I know there's this rich philosophy of bardo states and things like that. So in some sense, within Buddhist philosophy, you know the answer to these questions, that's why I said at the beginning, myself and Bernardo can have a sort of theoretical discussion about whether consciousness can survive death. But within the Buddhist tradition, the answers are already there. I mean, if you believe what is written, because they tell you what happens when you die. So that's what I find so intriguing. In some sense, you know the answers, assuming one does believe that. I realize not most scientists aren't going to necessarily believe the Buddhist writings, but do you think it's as straightforward as that? Do you think really one just can say that Buddhism does know the answer, or is there some element of uncertainty even within Buddhism?
Well, again, that I can't claim that I know everything, and but I know that we have a great, deep depth of explanation how it works after the death, and when the mind would leave the body, and after leaving the body, in the intermediate state, when it's going to happen, take the intermediate state, and then after how many days would it enter into another life, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of explanation. And that's explanation is one thing. As you are saying that experiencing one, how would it work? It doesn't need to be, you need to be die or dying, but in our conscious, now even we can experience in a mind how the body would shut, and when the body is shutting, that mind would be traveling beyond the body, or it will stuck. Then it is we talk, the mind isn't a form, it is formless, it is intangible. So this in order to that it travels, that when we go into our innate mind, that our mind is internal innate mind, as if it has all sort of planet that behind you there in the screen, like that, there is the links. So you can find the proof in our life if we are able to research properly.
Rinpoche, can I ask you a very specific question? Because I think this is going to lead into a conversation where I know Bernardo has strong views. In our interpretation in the West, we sort of have two visions of what may happen when you die. Obviously, one vision is that you just cease to exist. But the people who believe there's survival in some sense have two different views. One view is that when I die, my brain dies, but in some sense, Bernard Carr's spirit or astral mental body floats away like a butterfly and then sort of maybe gets reincarnated. So there's still an element of Bernard Carr there. So in this vision, there is an element of myself which survives death. But there seems to be another vision of survival which says that when I die, Bernard Carr disappears and just becomes part of the great cosmic ocean, if you like, part of mind with a capital M. So one has these two visions of survival of consciousness after death, one in which my individual mind with a little m in some sense is preserved, so a little bit of Bernard still is there and can be reincarnated, but another vision in which I just become one with the universe. Now, does Buddhism allow for both these views? Because presumably not everybody has the same fate, perhaps, when they die. Does Buddhism allow for both these views, or is it very much taking the view that our mind can remain individual?
I like your idea of flying like a butterfly away. That we can accept. I mean that it doesn't have a form, but as a nature of mind. However, that mind traveling, so you can say it's flying away. And also, I'm not so sure that we talk about universal mind. I don't know exactly how you thinking. We as beings, each of us have individual mind that fully cooperative and fully has a power to be born as a human or be born as a butterfly, whatever, that each of our consciousness has that power.
Are you hinting on a universal mind, right? Just one mind, right? Because it's not located in our physical body, isn't it, the mind?
That's how I'm using the phrase.
Yeah, that's why.
I'm assuming, and I think Bernardo will have a lot to say about this. I'm assuming there is a mind with a capital M of which we're all a part. And if that's the case, and that in some sense, this mind with a big M has fragmented into billions of little minds with little m's. and we're just
Yeah.
one of those. And the question is that when you die, whether you remain as a fragment or whether you can become merged into the universal mind.
It's
and
like
I'd always assume, because I have no experience in any of these things.
It's like Bernardo's.
Where Bernardo has a lot to say. But I was just interested in Rinpoche's views before Bernardo starts. I've always just thought if you're an enlightened being, you could become one with the cosmic universal mind without being reincarnated. In other words, that you no longer remain a butterfly, but you become part of the...
No, what I'm saying is, I'm not so sure about universal mind. And that's why I'm saying, we all have an individual, and you're talking about united to a, big M mind.
Yes.
So that it's a huge question mark.
Okay.
And in a deep level of Tantrayana teaching, it may, that concept may work. But in the general, in a concept, it doesn't work. And however, that we do talk about individual karma and collective karmas. So that individual karmas that we experience, what we create, the result we have to experience. And collective karmas that what we create, that we have to experience together, if it's good or bad.
Oh, I must say, I really like that.
That is very much of you're talking about the drops of water or lakes going into the ocean and that sort of thing.
I really like your reference to this collective mind, because that is essentially, I think, what one is proposing, that there's individual minds, but there's also a hierarchy of levels of consciousness with a hierarchy of maybe even a hierarchy of levels of karma. But Bernardo, this is clearly the point we must bring you into the conversation, because I know you have you've articulated very interesting views on this. So would you like to come into this on this point?
Yeah. Allow me to start by just first acknowledging a superficial problem that analytic philosophers have with the filter hypothesis. I want to acknowledge that. I think the hypothesis is still very valid as a metaphor. The problem some people with an analytic inclination have is that filters are not made of the same thing that they filter. A coffee filter is not made of coffee. A water filter is not made of water. So if there is a filter for mind, then there has to be something other than mind, which is dualism. And then you run into all the problems of dualism, like the interaction problem. Now, I think that's valid if we interpret the filter hypothesis literally. But metaphorically, I think it's a very handy way to get a grip on what's going on. So to speak literally, from analytic idealism, individual minds are dissociated complexes of this one field of subjectivity that nature is. And we know dissociation happens. For instance, if somebody has uncontrolled epilepsy, surgeons can sever the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. And the latest evidence suggests that you get two dissociated complexes. So if the person was called Richard, after the surgery, there are two Richards, but they both claim to be Richard. And you only know that they are two because, for instance, if you ask a question, the verbal answer given by Richard from the left side, from the Broca's area, which controls language, the verbal answer can be different than the answer written by the left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere. And then you see that there are two minds in one. So dissociation happens. People suffer from dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. That is in the DSM-5, which is the great diagnostics manual in psychiatry. It's the Bible of psychiatry. So the hypothesis is that something akin to dissociation happens in this unified field of subjectivity, creating dissociated complexes. And what these dissociated complexes look like is biology, life, metabolism. A metabolizing, living being is what a dissociated complex in the universal field of subjectivity looks like. And therefore, death is the end of the dissociation. Now, if you think in these terms, then you can imagine that because a dissociated complex exists thanks to the boundary that enforces the dissociation, you can think of it as a filter. The dissociative boundary maintains the cognitive contents of the alter inside and the external cognitive contents outside the alter, allowing only for some commerce of cognitive contents through the dissociative boundary, because we have sense organs that do exactly that. They are made to sort of pick up information from the outside world. So I think ultimately the filter metaphor, the filter hypothesis is valid as a metaphor. And as an explanation, it is more compelling than to just talk of dissociation, because it stays too conceptual and abstract if we talk of dissociation. So I think it is useful, and we should proactively use the metaphor of the filter hypothesis. Now, the question now is, if life is what dissociation looks like, and death is the end of life, then death must be the end of a dissociation. But the question is there a hierarchy of dissociations? And life is only the appearance of the last level of the dissociation. So when we die, we don't go back to oceanic consciousness, which is the term Freud used in the 19th century. We go back to the next fallback step in the dissociation, the next level in the hierarchy of dissociation. Some of the world's religions speak of this, like Jewish Kabbalah, Christian mysticism. They hint at this hierarchy of dissociation. For me, the question is, what evidence do we have for it? Introspective evidence, but mostly, because that's my focus, objective, empirical evidence for this. I think little. The most compelling evidence there is the fact that many people seem to be born with inherent dispositions, character traits, skills, abilities, preferences, tastes, that discern, they're completely different from their parents. So it's at least cumbersome to say that, oh, it's all genetics. You could say, well, these are, recessive features in the genome, and that's why the son or the child expresses them differently from the parents. Yes, I understand all that, but the sheer level in which this seems to happen, people being born with inherent dispositions that cannot be traced back to their parents, the sheer volume of this may suggest that there is another level in the hierarchy of dissociation where some character traits are preserved.
And also birthmarks, Bernardo, not just character dispositions, but I'm referring to Stevenson's work, where there are birthmarks which relate to the mode of death in the previous life.
I think that is interesting, and it should be looked at seriously by science. Yeah, but if you put me against a wall with a gun to my head and ask me to make a bet, I think I would bet on there not being a hierarchy of dissociation, and I could explain it to you objectively, because I don't think the evidence is overwhelming. But subjectively, and at least I'm self-aware and not enough to know that, subjectively, I prefer that there be no hierarchy. The state of being an individual mind is peculiarly prone to suffering. And I would hope that at the end of life, there isn't another dissociative state. That's my personal desire.
So, Bernardo, are you saying that in your model there is just one step? You're either at the little m level, where you're Bernardo, or you're at the collective level. There's not an intermediate step where you're the sort of collective consciousness of the planet or the star or the galaxy. You don't favor that.
There is nothing in the model that precludes that possibility. From a conceptual perspective and the inner logic of the model, that's perfectly allowed. you can have a hierarchy of dissociation. The question is, why does only the last step in the hierarchy have a physical appearance? Because when a person dies, there doesn't seem to be anything else left behind that metabolizes. At the moment of death, metabolism stops, and eventually it stops completely. So what trace is then left that correlates with the next level in the hierarchy? There isn't an obvious one. And that's why I think conservatively, for the time being, I would stick to there being only one level of dissociation. So when you die, you are what you have always been, which is that field of subjectivity. Personally, Bernard, I don't have a problem with that at all. Because when I think back, say to my childhood, when I was 5 years old, I am completely different from my 5-year-old self. My thoughts are different. My emotions are different. The world in which I live is different. My body is completely different. There isn't a single atom in my body that has remained in my body since then. Some have left and returned, but I have a completely different body. It not only looks different, it's materially different than it was. Everything has changed. All personality traits have changed. The dispositions have changed. So what is it that has remained the same now and then? Well, it's my subjectivity. And that does not depend on any dissociative process at all. So I'm not concerned if there is no further level of dissociation. I'm very happy to wake up and think Bernardo was a dream and I am the sum total of everything. That's what I would prefer.
Or maybe you'll wake up again and you'll be Bernard.
Well, that's already happening.
Can I just ask you, Bernardo?
Can I ask Bernardo a quick question?
Yes, of course.
So, Bernardo, you would not entertain Gabriel painting rice cake all the way down, painted rice cake all the way down. You see, Rinpoche here, Dalai Lama recognized him as the 11 reincarnations of Lelung Rinpoche Doche. So I just want to ask a question. Do you agree what Benito say then?
I don't think
Lelung.
I don't think the model I just explained is inconsistent with what we call reincarnation. And let me tell you why. If what we are is a dissociative process, then our thoughts, our insights, our memories, they are the mental contents that are within the dissociation, right? There is a dissociative boundary that keeps our mental contents local. So my thoughts, my memories, my insights, they are all within me and not in the rest of the universe because there is a dissociative boundary keeping them localized. If death is the end of the dissociation, then the boundary disappears and my memories, my insights are now released in this broader field of subjectivity. If another dissociation forms in that field, those mental contents that used to belong to somebody else could be captured in another dissociative process. Actually, there is evidence that that happens to alters. Another way to visualize that is to think of dissociation as a whirlpool on a lake or on a river. Say water molecules caught in the whirlpool keep turning around, but when the whirlpool ends, those same water molecules are now released in the rest of the stream. If another whirlpool forms, it can capture the water molecules that previously were in the earlier whirlpool. So I don't think the model precludes the possibility that one is born with memories and insights that used to belong to another living being. It doesn't preclude that. What I would tend to deny is that there is something ontologically permanent about an individual self, because it doesn't seem to be there even throughout my life. There is nothing ontologically permanent that has survived my 5-year-old self until the 50-year-old self, other than the very subjectivity that underlies all of their experiences. Other than that, there doesn't seem to be anything ontologically real and permanent and persisting that has remained there throughout my life, let alone across lives. So I wouldn't be too stuck on this notion that we have to find some kind of permanent individual self. I don't think it's there. There's precious little evidence for it.
There's always this ambiguity because, I mean, for example, if you have a child who has a memory of a previous life, you can always ask, well, does that mean the spirit, the self of the previous person has been reborn as an individual self, or does it merely mean that some small aspect of the previous personality has been absorbed into some new self? So there's always an ambiguity. So
yeah, because
I would love to hear how Rinpoche reacts to this. I mean, because
yeah, before Rinpoche react to it, because I'm just quickly add on. When my youngest son was born at the age of 1 to 2.5 to 3 years old, he always tell my eldest son, he said, "Did you remember our other mummy?" And I said, "Which mummy? Which mummy are you talking about? I'm your only mummy." I look up into it online and I found Ian Stevenson's work on the memory of the previous child was born.
Yeah.
And my son has when he first born, he's got a Mongolian mole, black color at the back of his back here, and it turned into raspberry patches. They call it something mark, a birthmark.
A birthmark, yeah.
Yes, from black color, and it's very red. And the older he gets, he's 16 coming, is fading off like a bruises of somebody just stab on him at the back.
Does he have a memory of a previous life where he abstained to that injury?
I don't entertain it, but he say, "I have a previous mummy. Where is my mummy?" And he has a problem with my hair because my hair is long, and he get really freaked out by it. And I have to put a cap on until he was 3 or 4 years old. Yeah, he could not deal with my hair, and he keep asking, "Where's my other mummy?"
That's fascinating,
years.
Ivy.
Yeah. For
Ivy,
4 years, he's talking about it.
You should write this up. If Ian Stevenson was alive, he would come and interview you. But can Rinpoche, can I ask you, because obviously you in some sense you are the 11th reincarnation. So you in some sense, presumably, do you disagree with Bernardo, or I'd be fascinated in your.
I wouldn't say disagree or agree, but I think Bernardo will need to have more experience. And then the more he experiences, the more he will realize this. And he's a good researcher, so he will realize one day. And it doesn't mean when one doesn't see it not exist. But it is valid when someone sees it, one thing, then that is exist. So therefore, there are loads of evidence. There are rebirths, and I'm not so sure that with birthmarks, how that scientifically can cooperate with the previous life and this life. However, that you can find people that with the stories and things like that. For example, by myself, I was recognized when I was 14, and as a fifth Lelung, as a Lelung Tuku, and then I was. As I am, named Lelung Tuku, then I'm interested to learn who he is and what sort of his works. So I learned that he have written loads of books. Then I asked the publisher that if I can have the set of his teachings, his book. So I got them. And then I was sitting at my room, and then I was reading, just like this, sitting up and reading it. And on the, I think, 13th page, that it's explaining, the fifth Lelung. That is the fifth Lelung, not the 10th Lelung. He's explaining his emotion, inner, emotions, how he feel and how he's explaining. Why he's explaining is he said that I don't know whether I am reincarnation of the fourth Lelung. However, I have this sort of, positive feelings. When I see people, and then he's explaining that when he see people, that he was recognizing those people. And then people saying, how do you recognize me? Oh, yeah, you gave me a piece of gold this much, and that is still with me, and things like that. Then where is it? Then he said, in a certain case, there's underneath, there's the gold. And then his assistant, went to look, and they can find that. And then also that he explained that on his right foot, on the heel, that he have a mark. That mark was marked by one of the previous Lelung's, fourth Lelung's student. When he passed away, then basically the corpse or the body was a lotus kind of gesture, posture. And then on the right leg, on the foot, right foot, on the heel, he marked, and that fifth Lelung has it. Then fifth Lelung, that when the student saw the mark, then there's no doubt. He said, this is my teacher's incarnation. Then by reading that, and then the explanation of his feelings, and I feel like it's actually kind of explaining myself. If I was, able to write like, beautiful like that, almost like explaining myself. And then one thing. Then another thing is that foot mark, when they talk about, then I was thinking, whoa, I do have one mark. But now my worry is whether that mark would be the wrong foot or the right foot, so I immediately kind of look on my foot. At the time in South India, it was hot. So I was barefoot. And I looked on the right foot, and exactly on the right foot on the heel, I have one. I know that. So it was on the right. So these are, very difficult to explain. But, if you really want to say something, there are things like that. And when people ask me, do you remember early lives? Then I normally say no. But, what I know and what I kind of going through, and, the experiencing, that some of them in a dream or in a real, that in the book, whatever is written afterwards, before I have the experience or I know, then after I was looking the books, exactly it is mentioned at the time what happened and so on and so forth. So there are many things that Bernardo, if you experience, you'll be surprised. But of course, as I was mentioning earlier, these things one have to experience to accept, and then when you experienced, when you go to tell other people, they won't believe.
So Bernardo, you just need to have more reincarnations, and change your theory. It's fascinating hearing those remarks, Rinpoche. Thank you so much. And I have to say, I mean, I can't claim to remember previous lives, but I do remember that up until about the age of 10, I would often have dreams, and in the dreams I would die. And I died in all sorts of ways. I was shot, I was drowned, I fell in a bog, a bridge fell on top of me. And what was interesting is that whenever I died, I always had some characteristic experience which somehow reminded me. I've been through this process many times. And what was odd was that these dreams stopped when I reached the age of about 10. Now, I'm not claiming that's evidence for reincarnation, but it's always struck me as odd that I would be having dreams of dying when I was young. And young people don't normally think much about death. And I still don't know what the explanation for that is. But part of me thinks, well, maybe it's because I really did die before. But I haven't had, experience at the level that you have. But thank you so much for raising that. it reminds me of a little cartoon I sometimes show in talks where there's a little child sitting next to the father, and the little child is saying to the father, "Don't worry, Daddy, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either." Which I think is quite a nice way of looking at it. So, Bernardo, maybe next time round you'll have changed your theory. But thank you so much. Can I ask you, I'm getting obsessed with my own theory. Can I ask you a very simple question, Rinpoche? Within the theory of reincarnation, can two people reincarnate as a single person, or can a single person reincarnate as two people? In other words, do you have conservation of souls, or can souls fragment or fuse within the theory?
Well, I can answer both ways, but I think it will confuse the viewers.
Okay.
So I will stick with the one-to-one, that sort of thing.
But you're not excluding the other possibilities, but they're just too complicated to get into. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you want to. Well, I'm not sure. Would you like to comment on that, Bernardo? I think you're going to say you're not happy with either of them, but
I am open-minded. I don't follow dogmas. If I have experiences at some point in my life that suggest other than what I think today, I will certainly not stick to my previous opinion just for the sake of sticking to my previous opinion.
Yeah.
I do think we have to be careful about how we interpret certain experiences, though. And you touched on it, Bernard, because what I was about to say regarding memories of previous lives is that when I read Schopenhauer, there were passages in his main book, The World as Will and Representation, that I thought this could have come out straight from my mind, word by word. And you feel that kinship, that recognition. But then I read passages written by Søren Kierkegaard, another philosopher, and there were passages I thought this could have come straight out of my mind. But lo and behold, they were contemporaries. They were alive at the same time. So, could I have been a reincarnation from one of them? There are passages of Jung, who I also read and think, wow, this could have been me. But how many people could have been me? I have this experience with a great number of people who were alive at the same time.
Well, that if I add a little bit. So, in Buddhism, when your realization in a similar level or same level, then you can read each other's mind, and then also when you preach, maybe the similar way, and but the lower kind of level of realization cannot read the higher levels realization, but higher levels realization could read the lower. That sort of thing. We do have some explanations.
Bernardo's story reminds me, when I was about 17 or something, I came across this book by J.W. Dunn, which was about his precognitive dreams and his theory of time. And it's called An Experiment with Time. And I read this book absolutely engrossed, because I was in the school library and I opened it up and I thought, I know this. And I was so convinced I'd read this before, even though I hadn't in life. I suddenly thought, maybe I am the reincarnation of J.W. Dunn. I don't normally talk about this because people think I'm crazy, because I was so familiar with his ideas. But then I discovered that, and J.W. Dunn was actually died in the year I was born, 1949. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. But then I looked in more detail and I discovered that he was actually died after I was born. So that theory hit the dust. But nevertheless, it's just intriguing, and I agree with Bernardo. You have to be very careful how you interpret any.
Yeah, but have you not have experience that you met somebody for the first time? You have a distinct intuition. You met the person before.
Yes, absolutely.
I've seen this face. I've lived this face before, but I could not put a name or space to it. Right? Yeah, I have.
Personally, I have, Ivy, but I will meet someone. I think I've known this person before, but I know I would never convince a skeptic of that because I couldn't prove it, and I might be wrong. But it's just you sometimes have this impression that you meet someone who you think you've met before in another life, but whether that's an illusion or not, who's to say? As Bernardo says, you have to be very careful. I mean, sometimes they say if you love with someone, that's because you met them in a previous life. But I wouldn't like to say everyone who's married has met in a previous life.
I can sense you, Professor. When I write you email, I've not heard from you. And then one day, suddenly I have this feeling, I need to check my email. Every time I do that, your email is there in my box.
Well, you don't mean me personally.
I've been writing you email and then you don't reply. Let's say you're busy. You're so busy. Sometimes you take you 2-3 weeks or maybe a while to reply back to me. I have this intuition with you, not with everybody. I haven't tested on Bernardo or anybody, but I tested on you. Every time I have this sense of you in my energy, I check my email, 10 out of 10 is you replying to my email.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm very honored, Ivy. And maybe we knew each other in a previous life before they had emails.
Yes, when I first saw your video in Essential Foundation, when I go through the research on Bernardo's website and work, when I first saw your face and I thought, I have met this person before somewhere because I had known this face for forever, but I couldn't put a name and location to it. I always have this. Yeah.
Well, that's very unfortunately. I've sometimes feel I've known my face for too long. So, but not for too much longer. So I'm sure it'll change.
Yes,
Ivy, I'm aware of the passing of time. Do you want to take questions live or from chat?
Hi, Lelung. Just want to say thank you so very much. It's been a while since we met, but it is amazing to hear your voice again, and was an amazing conversation to listen to. You talked about Tukdam a little bit about the process after death. That's kind of interesting. I shared some articles while you were talking about kind of there being some data of this from happening in 2021. Did you want to talk about that process a little bit more in depth? And if not, would you like to pick a topic that you feel is relevant for today, that you think that we should listen to?
Are you talking about the dying process itself?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's really a question for you, I think, Rinpoche, because that's...
Yeah. Well, meditative state that we talk about, and that usually that when people dies, then what happens is go into intermediate state, not a meditative state. So then in it has many in different cases have a different explanation, but then in 7 days time that whoever in the intermediate state that will take a new will be born in a new life or will take a new life. Then if not, that maybe go another week, and until like 7 weeks, Then in the 7 weeks, that is the end of the kind of optional, so that there is no option. It will take a form, that sort of a thing. Then when we are in the practicing, that we could practice in going through like a paddle, like there is a way to practice, but that intermediate state, and then think through and practice, and then these are the meditative states that we talk about. It is not mentioned by every Buddhist schools, I think. And then especially it talks in the Mahayana Buddhism quite a lot, because that the mind, when it go into the intimate meditative state, why it goes into meditative state is because that while they are in the life, we trying to understand the nature of mind, and trying to find out the nature of mind. Nature of mind is basically it is emptiness, and that if you in a conventional level, you can recognize a self, I. However, in an ultimate level, there is no such I or self. How we perceiving, as Bernardo was saying, when you look into it, then you cannot find
the I.
yourself as we are perceiving. So that is when we look into the self, there isn't. You will not be able to find as a self, like how as you see in a conventional level. Yet it is working. It is there is in a conventional level, there is a self. In an ultimate level, there isn't as a self, like it exists by or in its own right. Everything is independently exists. So when you thinking in this, then you will realize that your mind can expand or extend into another level because of this reason. If the mind is solid, it is exists by its own right, it means it cannot be changed. It always got to be there like a permanent. So therefore you cannot change. However, because of the consciousness or the mind, is the nature of it is the interdependency. Yeah. Therefore, it is able to find at the finest innate mind, which is we are not talking about five sensory type of mind, that the sub-mind, the pram, the mind, that the mind traveling one life to another. That we believe that the mind can extend in terms of knowledge, unlimited. There is no limit of the knowledge that the mind can kind of expand the knowledge, awareness. So that when you realize that mind is be able to turn into different level, then what you're doing is basically everything depends on how you perceive, how you name. We exist just by name. There is no solid I. So in this way, everything working in your mind, like Bernardo was saying, everything is there. So when everything is existing there, then you can visualize this, the omniscient mind, enlightened beings. Then you are trying to increase your mind as an ultimate level to reach the gap, the enlightened mind. So you are able to change the limited awareness into unlimited awareness. When you why you can do it because of nature of our mind and our consciousness have the power to do the power. So therefore we are able to increase the knowledge. When you increase the knowledge, like we are saying, realization, then there are many different parts of realization that where more you realize, you are increasing your awareness. So in this way, then in a Mahayana teaching, especially Tantrayana teaching, then you visualize the deities. That there are deities that almost specifically designed for you, for me, for others. So whichever that feels very comfortable, feels very suitable, then you visualize that deity, and you trying to visualize yourself into that deity. So in your in a mind, be able to get closer and closer, and at a certain level you can be one. So in order to do this, when you're meditating, then while you are in life, then you meditate like this, and then when you're dying, then you're losing your the five elements in your body, and then one by one, then the practitioners, they realizes what's happening, and then they dedicate their mind not to think about the relatives of the external belongings. They don't care, because external belongings always in their mind is just accessory, not a primary kind of thing or important in their life. So their attention will not be drawn by anything else. Then the attention goes into that. So more into the meditative state. So that then continues when everything like the body shuts, then the mind go into the middle channel that we call the Zauma. In the middle channel, there will be a wind that can, like a horse for the consciousness, that will be united, and in that state they will continuously stay. So this power is keeping the body still, might be warm or even not warm, but not get into smell or in a pot and things like that.
Rinpoche, with Ivy's permission, can I ask a follow-up question? Because your answer is most interesting, and it's this, that there is a lot of interest in the United Kingdom at the present in the question of euthanasia, the question of whether when people are close to death, when they're suffering, whether the doctor should be allowed to assist in the death process rather than letting nature take its natural course. And the argument being that they may be suffering for months and months from the last stages of cancer, where they could end it all by taking a drug. From the point of view of Buddhism, from a moral point of view, is euthanasia allowed, or is that against the precepts of Buddhism?
That is quite a tough question.
I'm sorry, I know.
However, that your advisor, the Stephen Hawking,
Yes.
he was saying that should be allowed.
Yes.
When he mentioned that, I did write up 2 pages of paper, disagreeing what he was saying.
Yeah.
So
you disagree with what he was saying?
Yeah.
Because
in certain cases, might be the Buddhism or Buddha's teaching, idea is follow with the way. It doesn't need to stick. For example, Buddhist monks, they have monk rules, but you have to follow with the time. Nowadays, if you just walking in the street by just your size of your body and in front, like 6 foot, then you will be run over by car and things like that. So time is changed. So you have to look around, not only in front of you like that. So it changes. So however, that if you say, by law, if you say, yes, it is right, then that might be cause into many different problems. And that, it may, become a lots of different problems. So that the person might in the beginning want to sign and saying, I want, almost like 10 times saying that I want to die, and they wanted to sign. Then at the last moment, maybe because of the health improving a little bit, maybe because they want to say a few words, few message, few something, reluctant to do, but because he or she signed, then they will do it.
Yeah.
So you have no choice. So therefore, from the moral point of view, by making it as legal, I don't know. That's a good thing to do.
Well, thank you for that. I know it's a rather unfair question to suddenly ask, but I've never, oddly enough, asked a Buddhist asked that question before. So I'm fascinated in what you said. I'm just wondering if there was some way of combining, the medical process of euthanasia with some spiritual help, which is more traditional.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible, because if it's like that sort of a death spirit, then in Buddhism we have a Powa.
Yeah,
means lifting from your body to another level.
Yes. Yeah.
So we call a Powa, and then I don't think you will think this is a good thing. True. However, that then I was in my friend's home. I don't know if Connie is here, but at her house, and that her cat, her dog was kind of suffering, and then also her husband Phil also worries. He loves the dog more than himself, almost like that. Then he is he never asked me anything, always he, something asking might be me, but never he asked me anything. On that day, I told him, you go work and I will look after the dog. It will not die, until you come back in the evening. He said, no, I'm not going to. I will stick with my dog. Then I thought, okay, dog will stay quite some time looking at the body stage, I thought. And then I need to go somewhere. And I called my friend to pick me up. And then I was walking to my room. And then Phil looks like, very sad. Then I asked him, Phil, I'm going, somewhere. Then he wasn't very kind of keen. Then I said, do you want me to stay? Then he said, yes, if you could, because in half an hour time, that the what do you call it, vet is coming to send away. So I said, of course, I will stay. Then I rang my friend not to come to pick me up, and I stayed. Then while I'm staying there, I was thinking, waiting for the vet to kill the dog. Then as a Buddhist, what is my, role? I felt a bit funny. And then I thought maybe I should, rather, the injection killing the dog, I thought maybe I should do Powa. Then I did perform the Powa. And then obviously, the Phil's family, not everybody believes in what I do. So I didn't do my chanting or the thing in front of the dog. I was doing at my room. Then after, when there's a point that you have to say the word very loudly, and then so at that point I went to by the window, kitchen window, and from outside I was doing the word, like he like that. So then when I was doing that, and then after I have done that, then Connie came out. Dog is gone.
Oh,
so then the vet came, but Phil said, I just need to pay. That's all he need to do. Then not only that, afterwards they have another dog. Then at that time, then both their family asked me to, do a chanting and things like that. So I was sitting in the kitchen, sitting with the dog. Then I asked Phil not to touch the dog. And then he said, why? Then I said, well, I'm doing the Powa. I don't want to send you up rather than like a dog. So he said, okay, it's like a kind. So I was doing the chanting in front of the dog, and then, doing the Powa. And in the right wording moment, dog gone. And that's another time. Then I have a friend called Maureen. They're all live. You can ask. And then there's a Maureen. When I was doing their cat, suffering, that's a much earlier time. Then I myself, I don't trust so much of what I practice, However, that the cat is in front of me dying. And then Maureen went downstairs to pick up something. Then I was in front of. Then I thought, okay, I should do something. Then I was doing the prayer and then doing like a Powa. Then a cat just gone. Then I was shocked. In time, the cat is gone. Then I was thinking, oh, dear, if Maureen was here in front of me, it's better. Otherwise, it could be, if like a scientist or some other people might have lots of thoughts. Maybe I twisted the head. Anyway,
that's a lovely story. I'm so glad I asked the question now, because that's a wonderful story. And I never realized that these ceremonies can be associated with animals. And I wasn't familiar with this word paw, which you're using, which is like the term for the ceremony, but it seems so appropriate because when you're talking about dogs, you always think of their paws, P-A-W. So, but that's, of course, just the coincidence. The word you're using is paw, which is I don't know how to spell it. It's a
Powa.
Yeah.
P-O-W-A.
P-O-W-A. Anyway, I will now always associate it with the paws of the dogs and the cats.
I have a quick question, if it's okay. In respect and appreciation for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I was wondering if before you leave, if you could talk a little bit about compassion. And I just want to say thank you so very much.
We say loving compassion. And also, again, that word is covering what I'm talking or not is different. But anyway, I use that. Loving compassion is so important. And if we all have a loving compassion, and there will not be any harmful. That's how it is. And also, if there isn't a loving compassion, there will not be any of us, because we all rely on our parents who have the loving compassion. And of course, the loving compassion, there are different levels of loving compassion, with the understanding whole concept of the universal, and or understanding the little family. And however, that the loving compassion, whichever level, when you have it, it is wonderful. You don't need any more. When you have a loving compassion, you have whole world.
That's very interesting. And I'm fascinated actually with this whole idea of love, because I'm not a very loving person, I'm afraid. But someone was asking me the other day, they said, well, what is the role of love in this sort of expanded physics, which is going to accommodate mind and spirit? How does love come into physics? And of course, at first, I just thought, well, physics doesn't say anything about love. It's something entirely different. But then I thought, well, some people say, in some sense, love is rather like gravitational attraction. You've got gravitational attraction between matter. Maybe love, in some senses, as a metaphor for gravitational attraction between souls. And I don't know, it's just a metaphor. But what is interesting is that when people have spiritual experiences, whether it's a near-death experience or whether it's a more fully blown mystical experience, love does seem to be a crucial part of that. And I'm not talking from experience, and therefore, if you're going to have a final theory, even an expanded physics, which is going to talk about these phenomena, somehow there has to be a role for love. Of course, love is a confusing term because it's used in so many different ways. I mean, even the Greeks had 12 words for it. But I mean, maybe we should also ask this question of Bernardo. I mean, how does love fit into your philosophy, Bernardo? I mean,
as somebody playing the role of analytic philosopher in the 21st century, I usually stay away from the emotional part of things. But as a human, of course, I cannot. It's just impossible. What I can tell you is that when I came to analytic idealism, that was over 20 years ago, at first it was just here, conceptual, intellectual. I believed it for logical and empirical reasons. I was convinced of it, but it didn't inform my emotional inner life. And over the years, and that's something I only really, that really became clear to me only the past few years, over the years it's sunk in. And now it does inform my emotional life in a way that I cannot help. And that became slightly, well, it became a bit of a problem for me because I was not someone to have a lot of empathy when I was younger. So I didn't learn or evolve all the coping mechanisms that people develop in order to be able to, survive while having empathy for the immense amount of suffering in the world. There is a raging ocean of anger, hate, fear, regret that's swirling right under the surface of our minds. And once you connect with that, if you don't have the coping skills, which I didn't have, when the war began in Ukraine, I was dysfunctional for months. And only now I'm sort of learning, to visit the room of compassion and empathy in the palace of mind when I choose to, and I have to do it because otherwise I lose my humanity. But I only now I'm learning how I can leave that room and lock the door behind me so I don't become completely dysfunctional. So, people who hear what we are saying about, one mind and the universe and all that, and they think, oh, this is so romantic, this is so wonderful. I really want to grok that. Well, be careful with what you want, you may succeed, and then suddenly the implications are laid bare in front of you, and you are suffering along with everybody else. And yeah.
I'm just wondering, but we often talk about the distinction between mind with a capital M and mind with a little m. Maybe we also have to draw a distinction between love with a big L and love with a little l.
When you feel in the core of your being that it's you looking to the world from the eyes of other people, that complicates things for you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Just wondering, but we often talk about the distinction between mind with a capital M and mind with a little m. Maybe we also have to draw a distinction between love with a big L and love with a little l.
Yeah, it's certainly an archetypal force in nature. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah. So thank you.
So Professor Carr, how do out-of-body experiences where people feel they're observing themselves from outside the body align or challenge your view with Buddhists and, with the scientific view?
I should say I am not a very spiritual person, but I have had psychic experiences, and I have had out-of-body experiences. And that is one of the things that got me interested in this whole subject, because the interesting thing about an out-of-body experience is that you do seem to be, first of all, you're perfectly awake. I mean, a skeptic will say it's all a dream, but you're fully awake. You think you're in your physical environment, and there is you're in a space. And I had out-of-body experiences when I was about 15. At the same time, I was trying to develop these theories. And it seemed to me that what you need to explain mind is some sort of space. Because most of these experiences, not just out-of-body experiences, but apparitions and near-death experiences, they all require some sort of space. So I would say the experience of the out-of-body experience, which was in a space, is what actually motivated my original development of theories. Because what was fascinating is that the OBE space, it's not identical to physical space. It looks like physical space. So at first you think you are in physical space, but then you realize it's subtly different. It really is it's a mixture, a merger of dream space and physical space. And so in my own theoretical approach, that's a key feature, that the mind involves this bigger space than the physical space. In my particular approach, Bernardo knows about it, it's a higher dimensional space. And the physical world is like a slice, a lower dimensional slice of this higher dimensional space. And within my particular theoretical approach, that is really crucial. And I mean, dreams take place in a space. And I have lucid dreams even when I'm not having an out-of-body experience. And in a lucid dream, it's in a space. And sometimes I can't even tell the difference between whether it's a dream space or physical space, because they look the same. And so I know a lot of people will just say, well, an out-of-body experience is just a dream. But I don't believe that, because first of all, in an out-of-body experience, you may see something going on elsewhere in the universe. You may communicate with somebody. You may even affect the physical world. So I don't think it's just an illusion, even if most of my physics colleagues do. And I think it's just a general reflection of the fact that one's mind has a reality, and the mind, in some sense, is communal. We think the physical world is communal, that scientists can do experiments, but that our mental worlds are inside our heads. But I think that what an OBE and all these other sorts of psychic phenomena tell you is that no, these experiences, our minds aren't just locked inside our brains. We're part of a collective mind, which is in a collective space. And in my own approach, I identify this collective space with the high dimensional space in modern physics, but that's just my own particular theory. Regardless of whether that theory is correct, I am convinced our minds are connected in this larger space. And, it's like we're all in the little prisons cells of our brains, and we think that's all there is. But actually, you can open the prison door and you realize that actually everything is connected as part of the prison. Our cells are part of a bigger prison. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but so for me, the existence of OBEs does not contradict this approach. To me, it supports the approach. But I mean, I don't know how Rinpoche will react to that, because within the Buddhist philosophy, that I'm sure they have a lot to say about that as well. But it does support Bernardo's view that mind is primary and mind is collective, and mind is just as real as matter, in some sense more real than matter.
It supports Rinpoche's as well. It supports the Madhyamaka line of Buddhism reasoning as well. Yeah.
I mean, Rinpoche, over to you.
Well, we have our own, each of us have our own entire world. So that will support your theory.
Yeah.
And Bernardo, your work often explore the primacy of consciousness and constituting of reality. So how do you take this concept of Buddhism, though, and the manifested universe? Did you see the same like Buddhism? Because Buddhism, there is no self. You have no self. Your cockpits everything, and the aggregates exactly the same formations, right? But you have a baseline of the self, where Buddhism have no baseline of no self. That's the two distinctions, right, Bernardo? Am I correct?
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in Buddhism, so I can't answer authoritatively. I don't think there is a ontologically real personal self. I think there is the universal self, if you want to call it, or you can call it subjectivity. Philosophers like to call it core subjectivity, which is subjectivity without a narrative of personhood. Subjectivity without that story we tell ourselves that I am this person with this name, born in that place, married to that other person who does this for a living. If that disappears, there is only subjectivity, the experiencer, that which experiences. So I think that is real. Not only that, I think that's the only thing that is real. Everything else are patterns of excitation of this one experiencer. So everything can be explained in terms of a universal experiencer, including the seemingly individual minds. I think individual minds are just dissociation. In other words, they're not ontologically real. They are a behavior of the universal mind. We are something the universal mind is doing for the time being, and eventually will stop doing. And that's all there is to it. We are verbs, not nouns. We aren't things. We are transitory actions. I think, but I don't have the authority to say, I think that lines up with the Buddhist idea of no self. It's ultimately, it's just not there. It may be a convenient fiction that we shouldn't just discard, because otherwise we wouldn't know to which mouth to bring the fork. And that's not useful. But I think ultimately there is no self. I think no personal self. I think also that what we call the physical world, it is a set of cognitive representations. And the analogy I like to make is with an airplane's dashboard, which is full of dials which show the results of measurements that the airplane's sensors have made on the real world, the sky outside. The results of those measurements are displayed to the pilots in the form of a dashboard of dials. So the dashboard does give you accurate and important information about the world. But it isn't the world, nor does it look like the real world. A dashboard in an airplane doesn't look like the clouds, the horizon, and the sun in the sky outside. But it does convey important information about the sky outside. So much so that if the pilot ignores the dashboard, he will crash and burn. I think the physical world is a dashboard representation of the real world. We have sensors like an airplane. We have retinas, eardrums, outer surface of the skin, lining of the nose, surface of the tongue. So we also make measurements on the world. And those measurements are presented to us as what we call the physical world. So the physical world is not the real world. It's a dashboard representation that arises when we observe the real world. And that may, I'm not the authority, but that may line up with the notion of Maya, the notion of the world as an illusion. It's a useful illusion. If you ignore the illusion, you run under a truck. You don't want to do that. You should, no, just like an airplane pilot should not ignore the dashboard indications. He will crash and burn. But the mistake we make is that of pilots who look at the dashboard and pronounce the dashboard to be the sky outside. No, it isn't. The problem we have is that unlike pilots who have transparent windows to see the world as it is, not only as it is represented on the dashboard, our airplanes don't have windows. All we have is the dashboard. We were born in an airplane cockpit without windows. So because all we have is the dashboard, we take the dashboard for the world. In other words, we take physicality for reality. But it is not. It's a representation thereof, and therefore Maya, illusion.
But Bernardo, I loved it when you said that we are verbs and not nouns.
Yeah, I like that.
That was
Bernardo.
lovely. I guess it's a little bit like Whitehead's process philosophy, but it made me think there is no self, but there is selfing.
No, it's the word.
Yes.
It's to
There's no
see.
me, but there is me-ing. And I
Yeah.
don't know whether that fits in with the philosophy of Anatta Rinpoche, but saying that self is a verb rather than a noun, does that fit in with Anatta?
The isness of us is a verb. It's like to see, you're seeing, right? It's
Yeah.
a verb. To know, to speech, to hear. They're all verbs. They're all in the verbs. You cannot separate them. You cannot. To lock the door, to shut the door. It's two. They're all verbs. All the actions is linked to verbs, Bernardo.
Yes.
Well, there is an example. This is from Alan Watts. It's not mine, but I think it's wonderful. We mistake things we have names for
Yes.
for actual things in the world. We project the structure of language onto the world as if the world had the structure of our language, which is absurd. For instance, we have a name for fist, and we think a fist is a thing. But where's the thing now? It has disappeared, has just violated the law of conservation of energy. It has not released energy despite disappearing instantaneously. Well, the mistake is we take everything we have a name for a thing in the world. And it's not. A fist is a doing. If I stop doing it, it's not there anymore. And I think the same applies to us. We are doings. And we want to think of ourselves as things that have permanence. And I think that's, sorry for the word, it's not very spiritual, but I think it's just silly.
But that's true. Self is like a fist.
Yeah, it's a
We can
doing.
even make a weak pun, Bernardo, about fist person identity. So
Yes.
sorry, but anyway, over to you, Rinpoche.
Well, thank you for this wonderful discussion, and maybe what Bernardo is saying, some instant, it goes with how we talk about the reality and conventional and ultimate level. However, maybe Bernardo slowly will also come back after all that his computer and his thought is a dashboard, not the reality. So anyway, thank you so much and for this wonderful discussion, invitation.
I said at the beginning, it's bringing together the three worlds of matter, mind, and spirit, and I feel our conversation has done that. And I know I've probably spoken too much, but I've really enjoyed it. And thank you for inviting us, Ivy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've met Bernardo on many occasions. I hope I get to meet you again, Rinpoche, but physically sometime as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. And hope to see you again, Professor Carr. And Bernardo, I'm just going to put you on the spot. when I invited you, we have Christoph Koch coming on. When I invited him, he humorously, he said, "Did you want me to debate Bernardo Kastrup?" I said, "No, we want you to come and debate on yourself." So I wonder, before you go, Bernardo, we quickly, if I get on to Coke and say, "Yes, Bernardo said he would debate you," would you come and debate him?
I mean,
Please.
he was just here like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we sort of debated the life out of ourselves, but we sure can do it again online, no problem.
Yeah, because I like your fight and your argument about seeing the brain as a holistic entity, rather than compounded and assembly. So I'm going to get him on with you, and then we're
Sure.
going to debate this issue. Thank you so
Let's
much,
do it.
Bernardo. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lelung.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye. See you
Bye-bye.
guys again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Love you all.